There are trucks. And then there are machines so wild, so aggressive, and so out of place that the world almost seems to reject them. Some were too extreme for everyday roads. Some were too strange for the market to understand. And some looked less like vehicles and more like warnings from a future nobody was ready for. Tonight, we are not talking about ordinary pickups, practical workhorses, or familiar classics. We are talking about the outcasts, the monsters, the experiments, the six-wheeled giants, the armored beasts, the high-powered freaks of engineering that pushed way beyond what people expected a truck to be. These are the trucks that felt forbidden the moment they appeared. The ones that looked too violent, too futuristic, too powerful, or simply too bizarre to ever become part of normal life. But some of them were built to dominate deserts, climb rocks, and crush rough terrain without mercy. Others were designed like rolling statements of excess, where brute force mattered more than common sense. And a few were so unusual in design that they seemed destined to be remembered more as legends than as practical machines. What makes a vehicle feel forbidden? Sometimes it is the shape. Sometimes it is the noise. Sometimes it is the sheer idea behind it. A truck with 6 wheels. A luxury machine built like military hardware. A performance pickup faster than sports cars. A giant rig so oversized it barely belongs on public roads. These vehicles crossed lines. They ignored balance, they challenged expectations, and even now, years later, they still feel like something the world left behind on purpose. So get ready, because in this video, we're counting down 20 forbidden trucks the world left behind. Machines that were too bold, too brutal, too weird, or too ahead of their time to ever be truly normal. And once you see them together, you start to understand why some machines never fade. They haunt the imagination. Apocalypse Hellfire does not look like something built for traffic, errands, or ordinary roads. It looks like the final form of excess. A truck transformed into a rolling fortress with military-style aggression in every angle. Massive tires, a towering stance, armored presence, and a body that feels designed to intimidate everything around it make this machine feel less like transportation and more like a threat. It belongs to that rare category of vehicles that seem almost too extreme to exist in the real world. The Hellfire is not subtle, and that is exactly the point. It is a truck built to dominate attention, to crush expectations, and to push the idea of what a pickup can be into pure apocalyptic fantasy. What makes it even more unforgettable is the way it turns exaggeration into identity. It is not trying to be efficient or understated. It is trying to feel unstoppable, like a machine built for a ruined world where intimidation is part of survival. Dodge Diora was one of those creations that made people stop and stare, not because it looked practical, but because it looked impossible. With its futuristic styling and wildly unconventional design, it seemed more like a concept from a sci-fi comic book than a truck meant for the real world. Even decades later, the Diora still feels like a forbidden idea, a machine that broke the visual rules so completely that it almost became untouchable. It challenged the boundaries between custom art, engineering, and fantasy. That is what makes it unforgettable. It was not trying to blend in with the trucks of its era. It was trying to reinvent the category entirely. Its cab access, A proportions, and show car aura made it feel like a forbidden vision of utility. Something too imaginative to become everyday reality. The Diora is remembered not because it followed the rules, but because it made the rules feel small. Chevrolet El Camino has always lived in a strange space between identities. It was part car, part truck, part muscle machine, part utility vehicle, and fully impossible to ignore. That unusual combination is exactly why it earned its legendary status. It never fit neatly into one category, and that made it feel rebellious from the start. The El Camino carried the spirit of performance while still pretending to be useful, and that contradiction gave it a personality unlike anything else on the road. It felt like the kind of vehicle that should not work, yet somehow it did, and that made it feel dangerous in the best possible way. It had swagger, contradiction, and that unmistakable feeling of being built for people who wanted utility without giving up style or attitude. That unique balance made it feel like a loophole in the automotive world, and loopholes always carry a forbidden charm. Ford Ranchero walked the same forbidden line, blending comfort and cargo in a way that confused traditionalists and fascinated everyone else. It was not a conventional truck, and it was not a standard car either. It lived in the gray area where rules broke down, and that is exactly why it still feels special. The Ranchero represented a time when automakers were willing to experiment with strange ideas and trust that buyers might follow. Looking back, it feels like one of those vehicles the world admired from a distance, but never fully embraced the way it deserved. There is something rebellious about a vehicle that refuses to choose one identity and succeeds precisely because of that refusal. The Ranchero feels like the kind of machine that belonged to drivers who did not want permission to be different. GMC Cyclone remains one of the most shocking performance trucks ever created. On the surface, it looked compact and almost restrained compared to giant off-road monsters. But under that relatively simple shape was something outrageous, a truck with the soul of a predator. It delivered speed and attitude in a package nobody expected, turning the idea of a pickup into something sharp, fast, and deeply disruptive. The Cyclone was proof that a truck did not need giant size to feel forbidden. Sometimes all it needed was the ability to embarrass vehicles that were never supposed to lose to a pickup. It changed expectations by proving performance and truck identity could collide in a way that felt almost unfair. Even now, the Cyclone carries the energy of a machine the industry was never fully ready to normalize. Hennessy Velociraptor 6x6 is the kind of truck that makes ordinary performance vehicles feel tame. It takes the already aggressive attitude of a high-powered off-road pickup and pushes it into absurd territory with 6 wheels, more size, more presence, and far more intimidation. This machine feels like it was built for a world where normal roads no longer matter. It is a statement of power first and practicality second, and that imbalance is exactly what gives it its forbidden appeal. It is too much truck for most people, too much spectacle for common sense, and too wild to ever feel truly ordinary. It has the energy of a machine built after the point where restraint was considered necessary, and that makes it feel like an outlaw among modern trucks. A Mercedes-Benz G63. AMG 6x6 is one of the clearest examples of luxury and brutality colliding into something unforgettable. It takes the already iconic G-Class formula and mutates it into a 6-wheeled giant that feels halfway between a royal convoy vehicle and a machine prepared for the end of civilization. It is oversized, overpowered, and unapologetically excessive. Every part of it tells the same story. This was never meant to be subtle. It was built to shock, to dominate, and to exist beyond the limits of normal automotive logic. Even now, it still feels unreal, like something too extravagant for the road. The G63AM, G6x6 feels like proof that once luxury embraces pure excess, the result becomes less like a vehicle and more like a symbol of domination. And Tesla Cybertruck arrived looking like a concept sketch that somehow escaped into production. Its sharp edges, stainless steel body, and unapologetically alien shape instantly divided the world. Some people saw the future. Others saw a machine too strange to belong in reality. That tension is exactly what makes it feel forbidden. The Cybertruck does not ask for acceptance. It forces a reaction. It rejects familiar design language, ignores tradition, and presents itself like a truck from an alternate timeline. Whether admired or criticized, it carries the unmistakable aura of something the automotive world still does not fully know how to process. Its existence feels like a challenge thrown at the entire idea of what a pickup is allowed to look like in the first place. Lamborghini LM002 remains one of the boldest identity breaks in automotive history. A brand known for exotic supercars created a truck-like monster with massive presence and raw aggression, and the result was unlike anything anyone expected. It looked outrageous, sounded outrageous, and felt outrageous. The LM002 had the aura of wealth, danger, and absurdity all at once. It was not the natural product of reason. It was the product of ambition running wild. That is why it still feels forbidden today. It is the kind of machine that should not have happened, which is exactly why nobody can forget it. The LM002 carried an almost forbidden mix of elite image and off-road savagery, and that contrast still makes it feel dangerous and iconic. Jeep Gladiator Maximus 1000 turns the idea of an off-road truck into a full spectacle of power. It already begins with a rugged, capable platform, but then everything is amplified until it feels less like a production vehicle and more like an unleashed project with no intention of compromise. The numbers are outrageous, the stance is menacing, and the personality is pure aggression. It is not merely about going off-road, it is about conquering terrain with almost theatrical force. Trucks like this feel forbidden because they go far beyond what anyone would call enough, and they do it proudly. The Maximus 1000 feels like the kind of truck that was not built to negotiate with terrain, only to overwhelm it with confidence. Ripsaw EV2 does not feel like a truck in the traditional sense at all. It feels like a machine from a classified program, a tracked monster built for speed, control, and intimidation, in places where normal vehicles would fail instantly. It looks military, sounds dangerous even in silence, and carries the kind of presence that makes it hard to imagine in civilian life. That is what makes it feel forbidden. It is not just extreme, it feels like something the average person was never really supposed to touch. The Ripsaw blurs the line between vehicle and weaponized engineering, and that makes it unforgettable. It carries the aura of a machine that belongs in secure compounds, hostile environments, and places where ordinary definitions of driving no longer apply. Sherp Arc looks almost unreal at first glance, like a giant survival toy designed by someone who wanted to ignore every conventional rule of mobility. Yet once you understand what it can do, the shock only grows. This machine is built to crawl through mud, snow, swamp, water, and terrain that would stop most trucks cold. It is a vehicle designed for the impossible, and because of that, it feels almost disconnected from everyday life. The Sherp Arc does not care about roads. It barely cares about obstacles. It belongs to a category of machines that feel too capable, too strange, and too purpose-built to ever feel normal. It almost seems designed for a post-road world, where survival matters more than refinement and capability becomes a kind of intimidation. Rizvani Hercules 6x6 is what happens when military aesthetics, luxury ambition, and outrageous engineering merge into one machine. It is enormous, aggressive, and packed with the kind of visual drama that makes it seem more like an armored fantasy than a practical truck. Every line feels designed to intimidate. Every feature reinforces the idea that this is not for the average driver. It is for someone who wants excess taken to an extreme. The Hercules 6x6 feels forbidden because it embraces exaggeration without apology. It is too big, too bold, and too theatrical to ever disappear into the background. It exists at a level of exaggeration where practicality starts to feel secondary, and spectacle becomes the main purpose. International CXT-XT series took the scale of commercial trucking and pulled it into the consumer world in a way that felt almost absurd. It was huge in every direction, tall, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Sitting inside one of these feels less like driving a pickup and more like commanding industrial equipment. That alone gave it a forbidden aura. It simply felt too big for normal roads, too imposing for daily life, and too extreme to become truly mainstream. The CXT did not just break the rules of size for trucks, it made those rules feel irrelevant. It was never going to blend into suburban life or ordinary traffic, and that disconnect is exactly what gives it such a legendary forbidden identity. Ford F65. O carries that same giant truck energy, turning a vehicle platform associated with serious heavy-duty work into something that, in customized form, becomes almost surreal. The sheer scale changes the emotional reaction immediately. You do not just look at it, you measure yourself against it. A truck like this feels less like transportation and more like a mechanical landmark. It is powerful, exaggerated, and overwhelming in a way that makes smaller pickups seem almost playful by comparison. That is why it belongs on this list. It carries the kind of oversized, almost untouchable presence that makes a truck feel forbidden before it even starts moving. In a world of standard pickups, the F650 feels like a reminder that size alone can turn a machine into something almost mythic. Jeep Forward Control. FC150 is one of those trucks that looks strange even before you know anything about it. The cab-forward design places the driver in a position that feels unusually exposed, almost as if the truck was built by moving every familiar proportion into the wrong place on purpose. That visual shock is exactly what makes it memorable. It looks practical in one sense, but almost unsettling in another. The FC150 did not follow the traditional image of what a truck should be, and that made it feel like an outlier from the moment it appeared. It still carries that rare quality of feeling both clever and slightly forbidden at the same time. It feels like a machine from an alternate branch of truck design, where usefulness and visual weirdness were allowed to coexist without apology. Like the Chevrolet Corvair 95. Rampside brought a radical kind of functionality into the truck world, but it did so in a package that always felt a little unusual. The side ramp gave it a unique identity, and the overall layout made it stand apart from more conventional pickups of its time. Yet that distinctiveness also gave it a strange aura. It was practical, yes, but also unconventional enough to feel like a detour in truck history rather than a natural step forward. That is often the fate of fascinating vehicles. They become admired later precisely because they were too different to fully belong in their own era. The Rampside feels like a brilliant side path in utility design. Clever, memorable, and just unusual enough to remain permanently outside the mainstream. Like Subaru Brat remains one of the weirdest and most charismatic utility vehicles ever made. Small, quirky, and totally unlike the macho image associated with most trucks, it created its own lane through sheer oddness. Even its most famous features made people look twice. It felt playful and rebellious at the same time, a machine that refused to imitate the rules of bigger, tougher pickups. That refusal is exactly why it deserves a place here. The Brat was never about brute force. It was about being different in a way the market rarely knows how to handle. And vehicles that ignore expectations often end up feeling forbidden long after they disappear. Its small size only made its personality louder, turning it into a machine that felt rebellious without needing brute force to prove itself. Volkswagen. Type 2. Pickup carried the soul of the classic VW bus into a utility format that felt both charming and unusual. It was not built around intimidation, speed, or rugged domination. Instead, it carried an unmistakable personality that made it stand apart from conventional trucks. But that same personality also made it feel like a niche object rather than a mainstream solution. It was too distinctive to be ordinary, too unconventional to be standard. The Type 2 pickup belongs to that category of vehicles that feel left behind, not because they lacked identity, but because they had so much of it that the broader market never quite knew where to place them. That is the mark of a truly unusual machine. It becomes beloved precisely because it refuses to be easy to categorize. Stout Scarab is one of the most fascinating automotive outliers ever created. It looked futuristic long before the world knew what to do with futurism, and its shape made it feel like a machine sent backward in time by mistake. While it does not fit the pickup formula in the strictest way, its presence in a lineup like this makes sense because it represents the same core idea. A vehicle too unusual, too ambitious, and too far ahead of expectations to ever be truly accepted in its own moment. The Scarab felt forbidden because it dared to imagine a different future, and the world was simply not ready to follow. It stands as proof that sometimes the most forbidden vehicles are the ones whose ideas arrive long before public taste can catch up. What these machines prove is simple. The world does not always reward the boldest ideas. Sometimes the most unforgettable vehicles are not the ones that become normal, practical, or widely accepted. Sometimes they are the ones that go too far. The ones that look too aggressive, too futuristic, too oversized, too expensive, too impractical, or simply too strange to ever fit comfortably into the everyday world. And that is exactly why they survive in memory. The forbidden truck is not just a truck. It is a statement. It is what happens when designers, engineers, and builders stop chasing balance and start chasing impact. Sometimes that produces brilliance. Sometimes it creates chaos. But either way, it leaves behind something impossible to ignore. A six-wheeled monster, a luxury beast disguised as military hardware, a performance pickup with no respect for limits, a utility machine so odd that it becomes iconic precisely because it refuses to behave like anything else. These vehicles were not meant to be quiet. They were not built to disappear. They were built to shock, to dominate, to confuse, to inspire, and sometimes to make people wonder whether they should have existed at all. That tension is what makes them so fascinating. They feel like artifacts from alternate realities. Versions of the automotive world where extremes won, compromise lost, and imagination was allowed to go unchecked. And maybe that is why people still talk about them, because even when the world leaves something behind, it does not always forget it. Some machines are too wild to become normal, but too unforgettable to vanish. They stay alive as legends, as warnings, as symbols of excess, or as reminders that the craziest ideas often leave the deepest marks. So after seeing all 20, there is only one question left. Which of these forbidden trucks would you actually dare to drive? And which one should have stayed abandoned forever?